Hello and welcome back into the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagele. And today's episode, we're breaking down episode 2. This is the second part of this 3-part series on conditioning. And so today, we are going to discuss the body's energy systems. These 3 internal engines within the body that power our activity, that power our performance. And really from a high level down into the nitty-gritty, what these systems do inside the body, how they work, the different adaptations that we should expect, and how we can train them. So in part 1, we talked about what conditioning really means, that it's not cardio, and it's more so about energy production, training energy production. And so today we're going to dive into that physiology, the 3 energy systems that create the ATP, your body's energy currency, to be able to power that performance and that activity. So if you'll remember back, right, conditioning is how efficiently the body is able to regenerate that ATP. And then from there, we have 3 kind of overlapping systems. The aerobic oxidative system, the glycolytic anaerobic system, and the phosphagen or alactic system. And again, these systems don't work in isolation. They're not siloed out, right? They're constantly working together, but just at different levels, right? As intensity varies, so do the role that each of the systems play. They're kind of like gears in a transmission. That was the analogy that I talked about last week. The gears in a transmission that shift based off of the intensity, based off of the duration of the activity that you're currently performing. So let's just go ahead and dive right in to that first aerobic oxidative system. Okay, this is that foundation. I've talked about zone 2. This is how that's trained, right? But this is getting at a deeper level of what the energy system itself is actually doing. Okay, the mechanisms behind it, how energy is generated through the system, and then the adaptations that we should expect through training these. So first and foremost, the aerobic oxidative system uses fats and carbohydrates as fuel. Okay, that's the primary fuel source. This occurs deep in the muscle, in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, if you'll remember back to, high school biology. Okay, and this system is very, very active during low intensity periods. If you're sitting here on a couch watching this right now, right, your oxidative system is working. Maybe even low intensity walking, okay? Low intensity movement, low intensity activity, even restorative and recovery type activity. This system is dominating there, right? That's where your body's generating nearly all of the fuel that you need to be able to power that. In terms of oxygen availability, it is very dependent on oxygen being available, right? This works through oxidative phosphorylation. So in terms of step-by-step, how does this system generate the ATP and the energy that our bodies need? So it can start through carbs that become glucose in the bloodstream or in the muscle, and then entering into pyruvate via glycolysis, or the breakdown of that glucose or glycogen cell, and then into the cytosol of the cell itself. If you're using fats, then triglycerides are then broken down into free fatty acids, and then those become acetyl-CoA via beta oxidation inside the mitochondria. So whenever you hear individuals talking about zone 2 training, building up more robust mitochondria, healthy mitochondria, really metabolically healthy mitochondria density, right? This is what we're referring to. It's increasing that ability to turn fats into, free fatty acids into acetyl-CoA via that beta oxidation. From there, we've got pyruvate or acetyl-CoA that then enters inside this Krebs cycle. Okay, and then from there, it's able to generate 2 kind of byproducts called NADH and FADH2. Those then deliver electrons into the electron transport chain, which is then going to form ATP, that energy currency, via ATP synthase. The byproducts of this whole process are carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, and H2O. Okay, this is the long-term engine. It's a very slow process, right? However, it's extremely efficient at doing what it does. You generate roughly 36 to 38 ATP per molecule of glucose compared to only 2 from glycolysis alone. Okay. Now, in terms of adaptations, the first one is going to be at the heart. Okay. Here we are basically doing what's called cardiac remodeling. We are changing the structure of the heart muscle itself. Okay. Increased left ventricular hypertrophy. So the chambers of the heart, the left ventricle becomes larger. Okay. It's able to stretch more. This leads to greater stroke volume. So every time that your heart beats, it's now pumping more blood because it's able to stretch more. Okay. This results in greater stroke volume and also lower heart rate at rest or submax. So if you notice that your resting heart rate, whenever you're sleeping, whenever you're just at rest, is gradually getting lower, you know that you are becoming more fit and more aerobically fit because that lower resting heart rate is due to the training adaptations that you sustain from training this way. Now, in terms of mitochondria, we talked about, greater mitochondria. Mitochondrial biogenesis is going to occur here. So there's more mitochondria per muscle fiber. Okay, they're just more dense throughout the muscle fiber. So now we can generate a higher ATP output because we have more of these powerhouses available inside the muscle. Now, capillaries also become greater in the muscle. So we've got more capillaries per fiber. This improves that oxygen delivery, that O2 diffusion, and then also metabolite clearance. So whenever we're talking about clearing, lactate and hydrogen ions and other byproducts of these processes, we're able to do so quicker because we have denser capillaries. We have more capillaries in the fibers. And then in terms of enzyme adaptations, we increase various aerobic enzymes within our bodies. So increases in citrate synthase, succinate dehydrogenase, and cytochrome oxidase. These help to process this quicker, to generate those ATP quicker and more efficiently. And we are also able to shift our substrate utilization. So basically improve fat oxidation at given workloads. Okay, so these become glycogen sparing, right? We're able to now exercise at a higher intensity while burning fat, which is where our body has a lot of it, and our body can efficiently make ATP from our stored fat cells. We also get these improved autonomic effects, so higher heart rate variability or HRV, better parasympathetic tone, and then ultimately from there, improved recovery. Right? Any of these sleep trackers that we're wearing, any of these recovery trackers that we're wearing, they all are monitoring your HRV. Whether they're the best way to monitor HRV or not, it's kind of up for debate. But they're measuring these, and that's what's kind of going into those recovery scores that you see on, say, your Garmin or your Oura Ring or even your Apple Watch. Okay, so in terms of the aerobic base, right, this is your infrastructure. Okay, the heart, the blood vessels themselves, the mitochondria, the aerobic enzymes. Okay, the physical hardware of endurance and recovery is built through this type of training by focusing on this low intensity, long duration activity. Okay, without this, you can be building power on sand, right? Think about a pyramid. Okay, the larger the base, the higher we can go. If not, we're going to be really skinny. We can't go as tall if we're got a super small base. So every high intensity system relies on this aerobic system for recovery, for metabolite clearance, and just to restore homeostasis or balance and normality within the body. Now, with that said, let's kick it up into the next gear, right? The glycolytic anaerobic system. This is that middle gear. Okay, mechanisms here are a bit different in terms of substrate, in terms of the adaptations. So this occurs inside the cytocell of the muscle, okay, the muscle cell itself. The process with glycolysis or glycolytic system is very, very quick compared to the aerobic system, but it doesn't generate to be able to meet those demands for very long. So here you can expect 30 seconds to 2 minutes of activity by being fueled through this system. Okay. The primary fuel is glucose, like blood glucose, or glycogen stored in the muscle. Okay. But the benefit of the glycolytic system is you can generate ATP very rapidly when oxygen delivery can't be met. So as intensity increases, as O2 demand increases, we now need to generate that ATP faster. And this is the system that does that. Okay, so in terms of the steps of this process, right? So you've got glucose that gets phosphorylated into glucose 6-phosphate via hexokinase. Okay, and then it progresses through a 10-step glycolytic pathway. And from there, we get 2 ATP and 2 NADH plus a pyruvate. Now, when oxygen is limited, pyruvate becomes lactate via lactate dehydrogenase. Okay, the result of this is what you feel, right? This is why hard, high-intensity work sucks, because now we're accumulating lactate. We're accumulating hydrogen ions. There, the pH in the blood and in the body drops, and we start to get that burn. We start to get that fatigue. Okay, a common misconception is that lactate here is the enemy. That couldn't be further from the truth. Lactate's actually a very valuable fuel. But the hydrogen ions that accompany that lactate, that's what causes that burn. Lactate is that fuel. Lactate's a buffer. Okay, so we need to correct that misconception that lactate is bad, that lactate's what's causing that burn. It's actually the acidic hydrogen ions that do so. Okay, so from there we have this lactate shuttle, right? So how do we clear lactate? Okay, lactate's then transported via a couple different co-transporters. Okay, we've got MCT1, MCT4, and those transport to oxidative fibers like the heart, the liver, and that goes through the Cori cycle from there. It's then converted back into pyruvate and then enters into the mitochondria where it's then oxidized for more ATP. Okay, so lactate isn't waste, it's energy. It's basically in transit. It's there, but it's going to be used for fuel later on. In terms of adaptations here, we have an increase in glycolytic enzymes, hexokinase, PFK, LDH. Those are increased so that we can enter this process more efficiently, quicker. And we also increase our buffering capacity. So certain buffers within the body that help to clear and buffer that acid, that hydrogen. So bicarbonate, right? Phosphate, carnosine. These systems are increased through this. We also increase those lactate transporters, MCT1, MCT4, to allow us to shuttle lactate better in and out of the fibers. We can also increase our tolerance to this activity, right? So delayed onset of acidosis, sustaining higher outputs for longer, okay? We can also increase cardiac contractility. So the ventricles become thicker here via concentric hypertrophy, and that can improve the force of the ejection of blood from the heart, okay? So we can have, from the oxidative system, if we think back to that, there we're expanding the vessel. Here we're able to contract more quickly, okay? So that's just what's happening inside the heart. In terms of performance, this system is all about tolerance. How do we tolerate the fatigue? How do we tolerate the hydrogen ions? To be able to produce energy very quickly and survive that discomfort that comes from that burn that we feel, okay? The buildup of all these different metabolites. How do we build up the tolerance to that? Okay, so glycolytic capacity determines how long you can live in that red zone, redlining, right? But if you live there all the time, you'll burn out both physiologically and hormonally, okay? So there's that mix of how do we train the aerobic system, how do we balance it with glycolytic work? Okay, now let's segue into that third system. This is the top gear. This is, 0 to 60 and 2.5, okay? The phosphagen alactic system, right? This occurs inside the sarcoplasm, basically the intramuscular space. And this produces energy to sustain you for about 6 to 10 seconds, okay? It's primarily fueled through stored ATP and phosphocreatine. Okay, with this system, no oxygen is required. Okay, it's simple, it's fast, and you get rapid ATP regeneration. So in terms of the process here, you've got a muscle contraction that hydrolyzes ATP to become ADP. Okay, we've got an adenosine triphosphate becoming an adenosine diphosphate. You also produce a phosphate with that and the energy that you need. Creatine kinase then catalyzes phosphocreatine to become ADP, ATP, and creatine. Okay, but PCR stores deplete very, very rapidly. So glycolysis has to kick in after those stores are depleted. So that's 6 to 10 seconds. Those are, depleted quickly, and glycolysis is going to kick in rapidly. In order to fully restore phosphocreatine, you need about 2 to 5 minutes. Okay, so it takes a long time to regenerate ATP here, but it happens very, very quickly when you're needing it the most. Okay. That restoration is basically aerobically driven. So this is where the aerobic system really comes into play, because the better your aerobic base, the quicker you can regenerate and fully restore your PCR stores inside the muscle. Okay, so think of this as that instant power source, right? Whenever we are doing a max lift, you're doing a 40-meter sprint, you're jumping, doing a box jump or hurdles, anything explosive, anything powerful, that's going to be powered through this phosphagen system. Okay. In terms of adaptations, right, there's a couple of pretty powerful ones that we get here. The first is an increase in your ability to store phosphocreatine. So greater high energy phosphate availability within the muscle through training this. You also increase your creatine kinase activity so that you can turn over those ATP faster. You also get neural efficiency improvements. So that's what's generally happening whenever you think about improving strength, right? We become more neurally efficient. So the motor units can fire faster. You can synchronize the muscle and recruit them in synchronization better. And you can also improve your rate coding. You can also become more efficient in the type 2 fibers themselves so that they can produce better power without as much of the fatigue cost. And then last, you can increase your enzyme recovery kinetics, so faster phosphagen restoration between bouts of exercise. Again, you can't live in this zone very long. Okay, but you can train it to raise your ceiling and rely on it less. So you can get more output per effort with less wasted energy. So now I want to talk through how the systems interact. Okay, this is where the physiology starts to get interesting, because these systems don't just switch on and off, right? They're not a light switch. They're constantly working in the background. They blend together and they work in conjunction. So, from a timeline example, right? The first 10 seconds of any activity is very phosphagen dominant, especially if it's explosive and powerful. Those next 10 to 90 seconds, glycolysis takes over. Okay, so we're using the glycolytic system to power through that first minute, minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes if you're good. Okay, and then beyond that, now we're mostly oxidative. Now we're mostly aerobic. That system is rising to dominate and sustain you for the extended bout of exercise that you're doing. But they're all active at all times. They just dominate to different degrees. Okay. So in terms of crossover, right, we've got the glycolytic byproducts, so lactate and ADH. Those feed back into your aerobic metabolism. Your aerobic recovery replenishes phosphocreatine and is able to clear hydrogen ions quicker. Your alactic power can prime glycolytic entry, so phosphorylation states can change within the muscles. So think of it kind of like a relay race, okay, where each runner hands off, but is still jogging alongside for support. That's how these systems are working inside the body. All right, so now what are the principles for integration? How do we build these together? And that's through vertical integration. Okay, so we train all systems concurrently. We're just adjusting the emphasis at certain times. So not block periodization where we're building one to then build another to then build another. We can train all of these at the same time, just in differing amounts. It's also important to go back to those residuals, the training effects that last, right? That sustain, and how long do they sustain? So we've talked about this before. The aerobic system can last very long. Those adaptations that occur can last for 30 or more days. Okay, the glycolytic system is a little bit quicker to degrade, maybe a week to 2 weeks. But that alactic system, if we're not training that constantly, 4 to 7 days, and then we start to lose any adaptations that we've gained from that. So, really the big implications here is you can't neglect one of these systems for very long because they do decay at different rates. But we can neglect them here and there when we really need to be powerful. If you're training for a powerlifting meet, you've got a good aerobic base, we can cut down on our aerobic training for maybe 30 days to allow us to build the alactic system, the glycolytic systems, to be able to then turn around and lift as heavy as we can on meet day. So So now why does all this matter? Okay, because it matters because knowing the systems gives you more control of your training. Okay, you can choose what you're training and not just get in the gym and go hard, pick random, mind-numbing workouts that tear you up, that are brutal on the shins, brutal on the feet, leave you super exhausted, okay? Because you now can train smarter because you know what you're actually training. You can design conditioning that improves your performance rather than draining it. You can respect recovery because you understand what system needs it most. Okay, so conditioning shouldn't be random suffering. It should be intelligent manipulation of the energy systems for targeted adaptation. There should be an end goal in mind whenever we're building a conditioning program. So now that you understand how the body produces energy and what adaptations each system is capable of producing, the next step is going to be learning how to train them. What are the actual methods? How do we actually program it? Okay, so that's what part 3 is going to be all about. There we're going to break down the methods, zone 2 aerobic work, right? Aerobic intervals, glycolytic power, capacity work, alactic sprints. How do we train these? How do we program these together intelligently to build a very robust energy system for your body and a really deep conditioning base? So the big thing here is that the aerobic system, the glycolytic system, the phosphagen system, they're all the foundations of your conditioning. We want to train them together. We want to integrate them together to be able to then ultimately perform better, recover faster, and be able to last longer during any type of activity. So that's the physiological backbone of conditioning. Okay, the 3 interconnected systems that never really shut off, right? The system that builds the foundation, keep you recovering, the glycolytic system that gives you the ability to live in that uncomfortable middle zone and still be able to perform, and the phosphagen system that gives you the power to be explosive and powerful when it truly counts. So when you start viewing training through that lens and you stop chasing fatigue and start building function within the body, you'll then begin to understand what you're actually adapting. Okay, we talked about mitochondria. We talked about enzymes. We talked about the cardiac remodeling, your neural drive, your cardiac output. It's not just getting tired and working up a sweat. Okay, it's actually about training these systems to be able to perform at an elite level at the top of your game. So in this next episode, we'll take all of this and turn it into practice. Okay, we'll break down how to train each system, and more importantly, how to layer them intelligently so that you can perform better without burning out. So thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed this, then hit subscribe, share it with a friend, and stay tuned for next week's episode of this conditioning series.